The first episode kicks off with Wally Clark frantically pounding on a door, calling out to Maddie inside the fallout shelter. Inside, Maddie experiences a vivid memory of Mr. Martin and Janet Hamilton on the day she passed away. Martin insists he was unable to stop Janet, and in a flashback, he tries to persuade Janet to return and express her feelings. However, Maddie arrives just as Janet charges at her, sending her hurtling backward into metal pipes. She crashes to the floor face down, her spirit rising from her body. Noticing blood dripping onto the pipe, she realizes her head is injured and looks down at her lifeless body. Martin approaches, calling her name, but a distraught Janet flees. Back in the present, Martin dashes out of the room, racing down the hallway with Maddie in pursuit. Meanwhile, Wally forces the door open, and he, Charlie, and Rhonda step through, finding themselves in different locations within the stairwell. Martin, still trying to evade Maddie, tells her she doesn't understand and whispers that things weren't meant to unfold this way. Urging her not to dig any further, he expresses his regret before vanishing from sight. Wally rushes over to embrace Maddie, while Charlie and Rhonda soon arrive. At home, Simon Elroy stares at a photo of Maddie in his car's side mirror. Overcome with frustration, he hurls his phone across the room, rips a Night of the Living Dead poster off the wall, and tears apart a picture of them together. His cracked phone screen still displays a photo of Maddie on a commuter bus. Elsewhere, Janet examines a bundle of cash inside her bag. She recalls a moment when she possessed MTI's body to steal the money. In her memory, Martin desperately tries to stop her, but fails as his hands pass through her intangible form. Janet pries open a door, dashes down the corridor, and escapes through the fallout shelter hatch. Back in the present, Xavier Baxter remains in the hospital on life support. Claire suggests notifying the authorities that Maddie is responsible, but Nicole Herrera warns that doing so could destroy Maddie's life and expose their own blackmail scheme. Claire insists Maddie will come after her next. Nicole asks if they can hold off until Xavier regains consciousness, while Claire takes a seat next to his bed. Meanwhile, Maddie recounts the events to Charlie, Wally, and Rhonda. Rhonda remarks that Martin witnessed everything, but Wally speculates that Maddie was behind the incident with Xavier's truck. Maddie clarifies that it was Janet, not her. Wally recalls seeing Janet before Maddie's arrival and insists she must be innocent. Rhonda questions whether Martin had been truthful about Janet moving on, realizing that he might still be hiding on school grounds. Determined to uncover the truth, Rhonda remembers Dawn's mention of a walk-in and shares this with Wally and Charlie. Charlie shows Maddie Martin's journals documenting their progress, while Rhonda informs her of his collection of their personal belongings. Maddie orders Charlie to gather all of Martin's records as she and Rhonda set out to track him down. At a roadside store, the commuter bus makes a scheduled stop, and the driver informs passengers they have 20 minutes before departure. Janet makes a purchase and asks the drowsy cashier about calling a taxi. The clerk informs her that taxis aren't available in the area, suggesting she use a rideshare app instead. Janet then spots a missing persons flyer featuring Maddie's photo on the community board. The clerk, noticing Janet's expression, asks if she's okay. Without responding, Janet hands her money for a Bingham County map, pulls on a cap, grabs an abandoned jacket, and leaves without collecting her change. Back at Split River High School, Rhonda and Maddie discuss ways to lure Martin out of hiding. Overcome with frustration, Rhonda yanks a tampon dispenser off the wall and hurls it to the ground before it resets itself. They hear a disturbance and rush outside to find Wally struggling with the fallout shelter door, which refuses to open. Charlie and Rhonda engage in a heated argument, but Maddie intervenes. Charlie suggests that only the living can open the door, meaning they need Simon's help. Meanwhile, Simon receives a text from Nicole asking about the Maddie photo. He attempts to calm himself, but from inside the school, Charlie and Maddie observe his growing distress. She approaches, trying to explain, but Simon walks away. Maddie later finds Wally heading to their old meeting place and confides in him about Simon ignoring her. Wally admits that he once trusted Martin and never imagined someone else would inhabit her body. He questions whether Maddie might still be alive, prompting her to test the theory by reaching through a passing woman who remains oblivious. When Simon comes into view, she hurries after him. At the hospital, Xavier starts breathing on his own. Nicole anxiously asks the nurse when he will wake up, but the nurse explains that only time will tell, though he is stable. Claire complains about her parents interrogating her when Sheriff Baxter arrives, visibly exhausted. He informs them that Xavier's truck was found abandoned several blocks from the bus station. Meanwhile, Principal Hartman and Mr. Price discuss the increasing student anxiety. Sarcastically, Mr. Price suggests a pep rally as a solution, but Hartman dismisses him and ends the call. Simon, feeling overwhelmed, requests a schedule change to eat lunch alone in his car. Maddie, standing beside him, urges him not to isolate himself. Hartman approves the request given Simon's concerns about Mr. Anderson. Instead, Simon agrees to assist Mr. Copeland in preventing students from using herbal substances. Rhonda questions band students about Martin, but they largely ignore her. Frustrated, she admits to Maddie that she resents not being able to unlock the door. Maddie reassures her they'll figure things out. Rhonda then opens up about feeling left out after witnessing Maddie and Wally's homecoming dance kiss. She recalls Martin possessing her acceptance letter to Berkeley, which she never saw again after her death. In a flashback, she questions Martin about it, but he hastily hides the letter and changes the subject. Elsewhere, Nicole and Claire use a public phone booth to contact the bus station, ensuring no connection to them. As they strategize, Janet walks alone down a dirt road. Claire tells Nicole that the bus driver performs a head count at every stop. In Rockton, a passenger exited but never reboarded. They agree to investigate tomorrow while Claire attends school. At Split River High, Simon pauses mid-game to read his journal. Charlie comments that Martin reduced him to a stereotypical gay best friend with low self-worth. Wally urges him to ignore it. They then uncover Martin's death map, which pinpoints where everyone died. Wally wonders where Maddie might corner Simon for a talk, and Charlie points out the greenhouse. There, Simon sits eating an apple when Maddie arrives. She reveals that Janet, who died in 1958, was driving Xavier's truck. As Simon begins to leave, she reminds him of their shared grief beneath the birch tree at her father's funeral. Skeptical, he dismisses her until she urges him to research Janet Hamilton. Nicole suddenly bursts in, demanding to know why Simon hasn't answered her calls. She warns that Claire wants to turn Maddie in. Simon, exasperated, says to let her. Meanwhile, Janet visits her childhood home and recalls her mother, Ruth Hamilton, gifting her a personalized lab coat. Back in the present, she visits a graveyard where Ruth and Reverend Joseph Hamilton are buried. At school, Mr. Figueroa thanks Simon for delivering Charlie's letter, remarking that it felt as if Charlie was still present. Meanwhile, Janet, overwhelmed, clears weeds from her own grave. Outside the school, Simon searches online and learns that Janet died in a fire. Later, he approaches Maddie and recalls wearing a blue tie to her father's funeral, offering to help her. He then opens the fallout shelter door. Charlie discovers strange markings on the walls, and Maddie wonders how long Janet was trapped there. Back at the hospital, Janet lies on her grave, weeping. Meanwhile, Xavier suddenly wakes up, gasping for breath as a crash team rushes into his hospital room.